Okay, so you know Texas pretty well. There's the famous Houston, the Gulf, the Hill Country, and the Big Bend Desert. But up top sits a fourth Texas, a flat rectangle whose borders were drawn in Washington in 1850, over slavery, not geography. They call it the Panhandle. Hidden in this flat land is the second biggest canyon in America. The only place in the country that builds nuclear weapons sits here, in the cattle fields. And a cowboy town here speaks dozens of languages. It never gets Texas's spotlight, but it's one of the strangest places in America. Here are 35 facts about the Texas Panhandle that sound made up, but every one is real. 35. The second biggest canyon in America. Remember that flat land I mentioned? It's hiding a hole you could lose a city in. Just southeast of Amarillo, near the town of Canyon, the ground simply opens up into Palo Duro Canyon, and it is the second largest canyon system in the entire United States. Only the Grand Canyon is bigger. Palo Duro runs about 120 miles long, opens up to 20 miles wide, and drops as much as 800 to 1,000 feet straight down. The Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River carved it over roughly a million years, cutting through 250 million years of rock, bright orange-red at the bottom, hard caprock at the rim. Most people can name exactly one canyon in America and assume that's the only one worth seeing. There's one nearly half the length of the Grand Canyon, sitting in the part of Texas everyone calls flat, and almost nobody outside the state knows it's there. 34. The helium capital of the world. You know helium from birthday balloons, and you probably assume it comes from everywhere. It doesn't. For most of the 20th century, nearly all of it came from right here. In 1918, drillers around Amarillo and Pampa hit natural gas that was loaded with helium, concentrations hundreds of times higher than normal air. The U.S. Bureau of Mines opened a helium plant in Amarillo in 1929, and from then until 1943, it supplied almost all the helium on Earth. By 1964, 95% of the world's recoverable helium sat within 250 miles of this one city. Think about what actually runs on helium. Every hospital MRI machine, rocket launches, the factories that make your computer chips, and yes, the balloons. For decades, the entire planet's supply leaned on a patch of ground under the Texas Panhandle. The government still keeps its strategic helium reserve in a rock formation under Amarillo, a gas that floats the world, pulled from one quiet stretch of the Texas Panhandle. 33. The capital that was bought with land, not money. In 1882, Texas wanted a brand new Capitol building in Austin and had no money to pay for it. So the state did something almost no government would dream of today. It paid in dirt. Texas handed over 3 million acres of panhandle land to a syndicate of Chicago investors, the Farwell brothers, in exchange for putting up the building. The pink granite Capitol opened in 1888, and to this day, it is the largest state capitol in the nation. The land came out to about $1 an acre. The investors turned it into the XIT Ranch, 3 million acres, 200 miles top to bottom, wrapped in more than 6,000 miles of fence. That's a single ranch larger than the entire state of Connecticut. The grandest building in Texas was paid for with the emptiest corner of it. 32. The cowboy town that speaks dozens of languages. Picture who lives in the Texas Panhandle, and you probably picture ranchers, white, Anglo, hats, and boots. Here's what you don't picture. Amarillo has taken in more refugees per person than any other city in Texas. Since the mid-1970s, Catholic Charities of the Texas Panhandle has resettled families fleeing war from Myanmar, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, Cuba, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. More than 4,000 people in under a decade alone. The draw is the meatpacking plants, which pay steady wages and don't demand much English. The result is a cattle town on the high plains where dozens of languages are spoken in the public schools, with faith traditions from all over the world. In 2020, the New York Times called Amarillo the Queens of the Texas High Plains, after the most diverse county in America. The most ethnically diverse spot in the whole Panhandle is the last place you'd ever look, a cowboy town nobody's paying attention to. 31. The morning the Comanche Empire ended. For 200 years, the Comanche were the most powerful force on the southern plains. They stopped the Spanish. They pushed back the Apache. They held this land against everyone. Most people assume an empire like that ends in one enormous, bloody battle. This one didn't. Back in that same Palo Duro Canyon, at dawn on September 28, 1874, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie slipped his cavalry down a hidden trail and surprised a sleeping camp of Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne. Almost nobody died, about 4 people total. Mackenzie didn't need to kill them. Instead, his men burned every teepee and every scrap of the winter food stores, then rounded up the horse herd, as many as 1,400 horses, drove them into a side canyon, and shot them. For a horse culture staring down a plains winter, that was the end. Within months, the last free Comanche band surrendered. An empire that survived 2 centuries of war was broken in a single morning, not with bullets, but by taking its horses and its food. 30. A trade network 13,000 years old. People imagine the Panhandle had no real history before cowboys showed up in the 1870s. The truth runs about 13,000 years deeper. Along the Canadian River, north of Amarillo, sits Alabates, a field of quarry pits where people have been mining a rare, rainbow-colored flint for more than 13,000 years. The stone is so distinctive that archaeologists can identify it on site, and it turns up everywhere. Alabates flint has been found up in Minnesota, out on the Pacific coast, and down at the Gulf of Mexico. One piece recovered roughly 1,500 miles from the quarry, about the distance from London to Athens. The first people to mine it were the Clovis culture, who napped it into spear points to hunt the mammoths that once roamed these plains. In 1965, it became the very first national monument in all of Texas. A single hill in the Panhandle fed a trade network wider than most ancient empires, 13,000 years before anyone called this place Texas. That's number 30, and we're not even warmed up yet. Quick thing before we keep going. Honestly, the comments on these Panhandle videos are the best part. Half of you are from out there, and you always know something I don't. So if I've missed something about the Panhandle, put it down below. I read all of them. And while you're thinking about it, a friend of mine wants a word.
You shall not pass without subscribing. And a like. Now, fly, you fools!
Right. Thank you, your wizardness. Okay, back to it. 29. The Cadillacs buried in a field at the angle of a pyramid. Just west of Amarillo, 10 Cadillacs are buried nose down in the dirt in a row, tail fins pointed at the sky, covered in decades of spray paint. Most people drive past and figure it's some quirky roadside joke. It isn't. Cadillac Ranch was a serious work of conceptual art, installed in 1974 by an avant-garde collective from San Francisco called Ant Farm, and bankrolled by an eccentric Amarillo millionaire named Stanley Marsh. 3, who used the numeral 3, not the Roman numerals, because he thought the third sounded pretentious. The 10 cars run from 1949 to 1963, planted to chart the rise and fall of the Cadillac tail fin, and they were buried nose first at an angle said to match the Great Pyramid of Giza. Visitors are encouraged to spray paint them, so the cars change color every single day. The whole thing cost a few $1,000s in junkyard Cadillacs, and today, it pulls more visitors than most actual art museums in Texas. 28. The ocean beneath the plains that's running dry. Under the wheat and the cattle sits one of the largest underground bodies of fresh water on Earth, the Ogallala Aquifer. And here's the part people get wrong. They assume groundwater always refills itself from rain. The Panhandle's portion barely does. It's essentially fossil water, laid down over millions of years from Rocky Mountain runoff. And today, it's being pumped out roughly 6 times faster than nature can replace it. 40% of all the water Texas uses comes from the Ogallala. In one bad year, the water level under a 15-county stretch of the Panhandle dropped more than 2.5 feet. One well in Floyd County fell over 25 feet in a single year. State projections say the usable volume could drop by a third or more by 2070. Without it, large-scale farming on these plains simply ends. There's an ocean under the Panhandle, and we are draining it on a clock, with no refill coming on any human timescale. 27. The Black Cowboy who built a city's other half. People assume Black history in the Texas Panhandle is either invisible or imported. One man is the answer to that. Matthew Bones Hooks was born in 1867 to formerly enslaved parents, and he became a cowboy at 7, driving a wagon. He grew into one of the finest horsebreakers in the region. So good, he worked openly alongside all-white crews on the early Panhandle ranches, from Mobeetie to Clarendon, at a time when that was almost unheard of. But that's not why he matters. When Hooks moved to Amarillo around 1900 with a small group of black residents, he built the foundation of black civic life in the city from scratch. Its first black church, a school, a community center, and the North Heights neighborhood, which is still there today. He became the first black man to sit on a Potter County grand jury. There's a park in North Amarillo named for him, and in 2024, the state unveiled a historical marker in his honor on Juneteenth. One cowboy built half a city's history, and almost nobody outside Amarillo knows his name. 26. The 1,000-foot wall across flat Texas. Everyone calls the Panhandle flat. Stand at the edge of the Caprock Escarpment and try to keep saying it. The Caprock is a near vertical cliff that runs about 200 miles across the region, and in places, it rises as much as 1,000 feet straight up, nearly the height of the Eiffel Tower, separating the high, level tableland on top from the lower rolling country to the east. It's made of caliche, a rock-hard layer of natural cement that resists erosion while the softer rock around it wears away. To the Spanish explorers who first crossed it, this escarpment looked like a fortified wall standing across the plains. And it's the reason Palo Duro exists at all. The rivers cutting back into this wall are what carved the canyon. A 200-mile wall of rock most Americans have never heard of, hidden in the part of Texas that supposedly has nothing to see. 25. The oldest town in the Panhandle is named Buffalo Dung. This one's real, and it's exactly as good as it sounds. Mobeetie, in Wheeler County, is the oldest town in the Texas Panhandle. It started in the 1870s as a buffalo hunters camp called Hidetown, and when the settlers applied for a post office, they wanted to call it Sweetwater, after the creek. That name was taken. So, the story goes, a settler asked a local Comanche what the word for Sweetwater was. He heard Mobeetie, submitted it, and it was approved, before someone later explained that the word actually meant buffalo dung. From that beginning, this tiny place became the capital of the entire Panhandle. First courthouse, first post office, the Army's Fort Elliott right alongside it, governing a region the size of a small state. A tornado in 1898 killed 7 people and gutted the town, and the railroad bypassed it in 1929. Today, around 100 people live there. The seat of power for the whole Panhandle was a town that accidentally named itself after buffalo droppings. 24. The Spanish crossed here 80 years before Plymouth Rock. We tend to date American history from the Pilgrims in 1620. The Texas Panhandle was already in the written record almost 80 years before that. In 1541, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Vázquez de Coronado marched an army across these plains, hunting a city of gold called Quivira, chasing a guide story that turned out to be a lie. He found grass, endless, disorienting grass. His men reportedly drove stakes into the ground at intervals just to find their way back, which is one explanation for the name Llano Estacado, the staked plains. The land was so flat and featureless that a soldier could walk a couple hundred yards from the army and lose sight of it entirely. Coronado executed the guide who'd misled him and went home ruined. But his expedition left the first European description of this place, written when Spain still thought it might hold an empire of gold. The Panhandle's recorded history is older than the United States itself by more than 2 centuries. 23. The day the sky turned black at noon. April 14, 1935, started clear and warm across the Panhandle. People were outside enjoying a Palm Sunday afternoon. Then they saw it on the horizon, a wall of black dust, 500 to 1,000 feet tall, rolling toward them at 60 miles an hour. It hit, and the afternoon went to total darkness. People couldn't see their own hands. They called it Black Sunday, and it was the worst single dust storm of the entire Dust Bowl. An estimated 300,000 tons of topsoil torn off the plains and thrown into the air in one day. That's like lifting hundreds of Empire State Buildings worth of dirt and carrying it across state lines. The land was bare because years of drought and overplowing had stripped it. The day after the storm, a reporter named Robert Geiger put 2 words in print for the first time: Dust Bowl, and the name stuck to an entire decade. A sunny afternoon became midnight in minutes, and nobody who lived through it ever forgot it. 22. The town of 3,000, rebuilt by 4 continents. Up Highway 87 from Amarillo sits Cactus, Texas, population around 3,000. You'd expect a sleepy ranching town. Instead, Cactus is one of the most quietly international places in America. For more than 40 years, its giant beef-packing plant has run on wave after wave of immigrant and refugee labor. Vietnamese and Laotian refugees in the 70s and 80s, then Mexican workers, then Guatemalans, then Somalis, then Burmese. The plant employs more than 3,000 people and processes thousands of cattle a day. The surrounding county is now majority Hispanic, and at one point, it had one of the highest concentrations of Muslim residents per person of any county in America. A tiny panhandle town with a mosque and a halal market on the high plains. In December 2006, a federal immigration raid here arrested nearly 300 people in one day, about a tenth of the entire town. Cactus emptied, then refilled again. A town of 3,000, rebuilt from scratch by people from 4 different continents, in a place you'd never think to look. 21. The stone apartment builders who vanished before Coronado. When Coronado crossed these plains in 1541, he found grass and nomads. But he was about a century too late to find something stranger. Between roughly 1200 and 1450, a people we now call the Antelope Creek culture lived along the Canadian River and did something no other plains people did. They built permanent houses out of stone. Multi-room masonry homes with stone foundations and walls, some more than 20 feet on a side. An architectural style that looks borrowed from the pueblos of New Mexico, grafted onto a plains way of life. They hunted bison, grew corn and beans, and mined that same rainbow alabates flint from the quarries nearby. They traded for seashells and turquoise from hundreds of miles away. And then, around 1450, they were gone, likely pushed out by drought, by raiding, or both, leaving their stone villages as ruins. By the time the Spanish arrived, the apartment builders of the Canadian River had already been gone for 100 years. 20. The cowboys who went on strike. The cowboy is the American symbol of the rugged individualist, the loner who answers to nobody. So here's a fact that breaks the myth. In 1883, the cowboys of the Texas Panhandle organized and went on strike. As the open range gave way to big corporate ranches, the hands lost the old perks. The right to brand a few mavericks of their own, to run a small personal herd, to be paid partly in calves. So about 328 cowboys, across 5 major ranches, signed a written ultimatum demanding fixed wages, $50 a month, and they walked off. They had a strike fund and a list of demands. Newspapers from New York to Colorado covered it. Eastern papers falsely reported the strikers were burning fences and killing cattle, but no violence ever happened. The leaders insisted on a peaceful, legal protest. The strike fizzled by roundup season, undone by railroads and hard winters changing the work for good. But for a moment, the most independent figure in American mythology ran one of the most organized labor actions on the frontier. 19. The 19,000 ghost lakes nobody counts. Scattered across the Panhandle are roughly 19,000 shallow, round basins called Playa lakes. Temporary lakes that fill with rain and then dry out and vanish, over and over. Most people have never heard of them, and even most Texans couldn't name one. But they may be the most important water feature in the region. Remember the Ogallala draining on a clock? These playas are very nearly the only thing recharging it. When rain pools in a playa and then soaks down through the cracked clay floor, that's the main pathway water has to get back underground in Texas. No playas, no refill. They average about 15 acres each, though some sprawl past 800, and together they make the Panhandle one of the densest wetland systems in North America. A critical rest stop on the Central Flyway for migrating ducks, geese, and even endangered whooping cranes. 19,000 disappearing lakes hiding in plain sight, quietly doing the one job that keeps the water under the plains from running out. 18. The town of 2,000 that throws an Irish party for 10,000. Out on Old Route 66 in the eastern Panhandle sits Shamrock, Texas. Population about 2,000. The name isn't a marketing gimmick. It was christened in 1890 by an Irish immigrant named George Nickel, who applied to open a post office at his dugout home and named it for the Shamrock, which his mother believed brought good luck. And the town has run with it ever since. Every March, Shamrock throws a St. Patrick's Day celebration that pulls in 10 to 12,000 people, 6 times its own population, including visitors who travel from Ireland specifically to attend. There's a piece of genuine Irish Blarney stone set into a marker downtown. The town is also home to the U-Drop Inn, a gleaming 1936 Art Deco gas station and cafe on Route 66. So striking, it helped inspire a building in the Pixar film Cars. A town of 2,000 becomes one of the biggest little St. Patrick's Days in America, proof the Panhandle's roots reach a lot further than cattle. 17. The last Comanche chief who got more powerful after he lost. We tend to assume defeated native leaders simply faded away. Quanah Parker did the opposite. He was the son of a Comanche war chief and a white captive named Cynthia Ann Parker, who'd been taken as a girl, raised Comanche, and then forcibly rescued back to a white family she no longer wanted. She reportedly died of heartbreak trying to return to her Comanche children. Quanah led the Quahada, the last Comanche band to hold out, and he never surrendered in battle. He walked his people onto the reservation in 1875, only when the buffalo and the horses were gone. And then, he became something almost no defeated war leader ever becomes, more powerful in peace than in war. He turned rancher and shrewd businessman, negotiated lucrative grazing leases with Texas cattlemen, served as a judge, lobbied in Washington, and went hunting with President Theodore Roosevelt, who came to visit him. A Texas town, Quanah, is named in his honor. The last holdout chief of the Southern Plains ended up wealthier and more politically connected than the men who defeated him. 16. The real story behind Lonesome Dove. If you know the great American Western Lonesome Dove, the Pulitzer-winning novel, the legendary miniseries, you might assume it's pure fiction. It's not. Its backbone is real Panhandle history. In 1866, 2 paddlemen named Charles Goodnight and Oliver Loving blazed a trail driving longhorns across this region and out toward New Mexico and Colorado, opening country nobody had driven before. On one of those drives, Loving was wounded in a fight, rode 100 miles for help, and died, making Goodnight promise to carry his body back to Texas for burial. Goodnight kept that promise. Larry McMurtry built Lonesome Dove directly on these 2 men. Its heroes, Gus and Call, are drawn straight from Loving and Goodnight, and Loving's death plays out in the story almost exactly as it happened. And on that very first drive, Goodnight rigged up a surplus army wagon with a built-in chuck box, inventing the chuck wagon, the rolling kitchen behind every cattle drive ever since. Every chuck wagon in every Western you've ever seen traces back to one man, on one trail, across the Texas Panhandle. 15. The city that's been saying its own name wrong for 130 years. Amarillo is Spanish for yellow, named for the yellow soil and wildflowers along a nearby creek, and the Spanish speakers who named it said it the Spanish way, Amarillo. Here's the strange part. The people who live there today don't. They say Amarillo, with a hard double L sound that doesn't exist in the original Spanish. And we know exactly how it happened. When the railroad came through in the 1880s, the conductors calling out the stops couldn't speak Spanish, so they anglicized it, flattened Rio into Rillo, and that mispronunciation stuck so hard it became the official local pronunciation. So a city of nearly 200,000 people says its own name in a way that's definitively wrong in the language it came from, and has done every single day for more than 130 years, all because of train conductors who couldn't roll an L. 14. The coldest temperature in Texas history, and the fight over where it belongs. Quick, picture the coldest spot in Texas. You're probably thinking mountains, far west Texas, high elevation. Wrong. The coldest temperature ever officially recorded in Texas was 23 degrees below zero, set on February 12, 1899, at Tulia, out on the flat, open plains of the Panhandle. Not a mountain in sight. That's colder than the average January day in Anchorage, Alaska. And here's where I want to hear from you, because I know some of you are already typing. Tulia sits in Swisher County, right on the southern edge of the Panhandle, and some folks insist that bottom strip is really the South Plains, not the Panhandle at all. I've gone through the maps and the county lists, and by every official definition I can find, Swisher County is in the Panhandle. So the record stands, it's ours. But if you're from down there and you want to fight me on it, the comments are right below. The coldest Texas has ever been wasn't in the mountains. It was here, on the plains everyone underestimates. 13. The German Catholic Nazareth, hiding in cowboy country. You'd expect Texas's old European immigrant colonies to be down in the hill country, the German towns around Fredericksburg, the Czech settlements. You would not expect one in the heart of the Panhandle, named after the birthplace of Jesus. But in 1902, a Catholic missionary priest named Father Joseph Reisdorf set out to plant a German Catholic farming community on the open Panhandle Plains. He arrived with a handful of families, named the settlement Nazareth, and advertised in German-language Catholic newspapers across the Midwest, recruiting settlers who wanted cheap land and a tight religious community. It worked. Nazareth took root and held its identity for over a century. As late as the 1980s, around 85% of the town was Catholic, with the church at the absolute center of daily life. It survived the Dust Bowl, which shrank it to about 50 people, and it's still there today, a few hundred residents strong. A planted German Catholic colony called Nazareth, quietly farming the Panhandle for 120 years, about 75 years before someone buried 10 Cadillacs in a field 40 miles away. 12. The lake that an invasive plant nearly drank dry. For decades, the water supply for 11 Panhandle cities, Amarillo and Lubbock among them, came mostly from one reservoir on the Canadian River, Lake Meredith. People assume a lake disappears because of drought. Meredith's near death was stranger than that. At its peak in 1973, the lake stood about 100 feet deep. By August 2013, it had collapsed to just 26 feet, the lowest on record. And in 2011, water deliveries from it stopped completely. Drought was part of it, but the bigger culprit was a plant, salt cedar, an invasive shrub brought to America as an ornamental in the 1800s, choked the Canadian River watershed, and a single acre of it can drink up to 7 acre-feet of water a year. It was quite literally drinking the river before the river could reach the lake. Crews have since cleared tens of thousands of acres of it, and with better rains, the lake has partly recovered. A city's water supply nearly vanished, not because the sky dried up, but because a decorative bush drank the river first. 11. The free 72-ounce steak almost nobody beats. In Amarillo, off Interstate 40, sits the Big Texan Steak Ranch, and it makes you a deal. Eat a 72-ounce steak dinner in 1 hour, and the whole thing is free. 72 ounces is 4.5 pounds of beef. And it isn't just the steak. To win, you have to finish a shrimp cocktail, a baked potato, a salad, and a bread roll too. All of it in 60 minutes on a raised platform in the middle of the dining room while everyone watches. Get up from the table and you lose. Fail and it costs you $72. Since the 1960s, more than 90,000 people have tried it. Only around 1 in 10 walks away a winner. The record is almost hard to say out loud. In 2014, competitive eater Molly Schuyler finished the entire meal in 4 minutes and 58 seconds, then ordered a second one and ate that too. The USDA suggests 3 to 4 ounces of beef as a serving. She ate roughly 2 dozen servings before most people finish their coffee. That's 25 down, 10 to go. And this is where the Panhandle stops being strange and starts being almost unbelievable. The biggest ones are still ahead. 10. The World War II prisoners who painted a Panhandle church. During World War II, one of the largest prisoner of war camps in the entire United States wasn't on a coast or in some guarded desert. It was 3 miles outside Hereford, Texas, in the wheat country of the Panhandle. Camp Hereford held around 5,000 Italian soldiers captured in North Africa. And here's the part that's still standing today. Among the prisoners were trained artists, and a local priest arranged for a handful of them to decorate a nearby Catholic church in the tiny German settlement of Umbarger. In exchange for extra food, these Italian POWs painted frescoes and carved woodwork inside St. Mary's, including a Last Supper, while local farm girls posed as models for the angels on the walls. The war ended, the prisoners went home to Italy, and the paintings simply stayed. You can walk into a small church in the Texas Panhandle right now and look up at fine art painted by enemy prisoners of war 80 years ago, still hanging there today, long after the war that put them there ended. 9. The Wild West Town, a railroad killed without firing a shot. Before Amarillo existed, the wildest town in the Panhandle was Tascosa, a cattle town on the Canadian River with 7 saloons and a boot hill cemetery that filled up faster than the town could grow. It was lawless enough to make newspapers in New York and London. Billy the Kid wintered his horse herd just south of town in 1878, racing horses and gambling. Pat Garrett, the man who would eventually kill him, passed through chasing him. The town survived gunfights, cattle wars, and drought. People assume frontier towns died violent deaths, burned down, shot up, run off. Tascosa didn't. It was killed by a decision made in an office. When the railroad routed its line about 15 miles to the south in the 1880s, the trade went to the new stop, which became Amarillo, and Tascosa simply withered. By 1939, it was a ghost town. The wildest town in the Panhandle outlasted its outlaws and was finished off by 15 miles of track laid in the wrong direction. 8. The Panhandle's borders were drawn by a fight over slavery. Look at the Texas Panhandle on a map, and it's a near-perfect rectangle. Straight lines on all sides, matching no river, no mountain, no natural feature at all. That's because those borders weren't drawn by geography. They were drawn by politicians fighting over slavery. Back in 1820, the Missouri Compromise set a line across the country at the latitude of 36 degrees 30 minutes, the dividing line between free territory and slave territory. That exact line became the Panhandle's northern border. Then the Compromise of 1850, sorting out Texas's boundaries after the war with Mexico, fixed the western edge at the 103rd meridian, and an older treaty set the eastern one. The result is a rectangle about 170 miles by 167 miles, bigger than plenty of US states, built entirely out of abstract lines argued over in Washington decades before anyone farmed it. Every edge of the Panhandle is a straight line on a map, drawn not by the land, but by the politics of slavery, 30 years before the Civil War. 7. The last of a vanished buffalo bloodline, saved by one woman. By the 1870s, hide hunters had nearly wiped the Southern Plains bison off the face of the earth. Tens of millions of animals reduced to almost nothing in a few years. In 1878, on a ranch in Palo Duro Canyon, a woman named Mary Ann Goodnight couldn't stand it. She asked her husband, the rancher Charles Goodnight, to save a few orphaned calves whose mothers had been shot. He did, and he kept that little herd going for the rest of his life, never mixing in outside bloodlines. Here's why that mattered. Over a century later, in 1996, scientists tested the descendants of those calves. The herd carried genetic markers found in no other bison population in North America. They were the last of the Southern Plains bison, a distinct bloodline that would have vanished entirely. That herd survives today, protected at Caprock Canyon State Park, the official Texas state bison herd. Every animal in it traces back to a handful of orphaned calves and to one woman in a canyon who refused to watch a species disappear. 6. The Dust Bowl created America's greatest folk singer right here. You know the songs even if you don't know you do. This Land Is Your Land came from this man. Woody Guthrie is remembered as the voice of the Oklahoma Dust Bowl refugees who fled to California. But here's what gets lost. Guthrie wasn't living in Oklahoma during the worst of it. He was in the Texas Panhandle. He spent his late teens and 20s in Pampa, a panhandle oil town, from around 1929 through the 1930s, which means he was right here, in the middle of it. On Black Sunday in 1935, when the sky went black at noon, he watched the dust bury fences and choke cattle. He watched his neighbors lose everything and load up for California. And that experience, the poverty, the storms, the exodus, is what turned a young man with a guitar into the most important protest folk musician in American history. The dust that destroyed the Panhandle also created the voice that sang about it. America's folk songbook was born, in part, out of a Texas Panhandle dust storm. 5. The show that's run on a canyon wall for nearly 60 years. Down inside Palo Duro Canyon, against a 600-foot cliff wall, there's a natural rock amphitheater. And almost every summer night since 1966, a full musical production has been performed there. It's called Texas, an outdoor musical drama about the ranchers and settlers who built the Panhandle in the 1880s. And it runs with a cast of 60-plus performers, live horses, music, and fireworks bouncing off the canyon walls. It is the best attended outdoor musical drama in the entire United States. Think about where this is happening. This is the same canyon where, less than a century before the first performance, the Comanche Empire came to its end in a single morning. Now, on summer nights, audiences sit in seats carved into that same canyon and watch the history of this place performed against a wall of 600-foot rock. Nearly 60 years, almost every night of the summer, in a canyon most Americans don't even know exists. The biggest outdoor show in the country, hidden in a hole in the flat Texas plains. 4. The oldest ranch in the Panhandle still runs cattle today. This same canyon is where the Texas Panhandle's cattle empire actually began. In 1876, Charles Goodnight drove 1,600 longhorns down an old Comanche trail into Palo Duro Canyon and started ranching, the first ranch and the first permanent settlement in the Panhandle. He partnered with an Irish-born financier named John Adair, and they named it the J.A. Ranch, after Adair's initials. At its peak, the J.A. sprawled across more than 1 million acres, roughly the size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined, and ran over 100,000 head of cattle, all managed from the floor of a canyon most people didn't know was there. But here's the part that gets me. The J.A. Ranch never stopped. It's been continuously operated since 1876. Through the end of the Open Range, the Dust Bowl, the Depression, 2 world wars, and into today. And it's still owned by descendants of that original partnership, almost 150 years later. The oldest ranch in the Panhandle is still running cattle in the same canyon where it started, under the same family, after nearly a century and a half. 3. The beef capital of the entire planet. You've eaten this place without knowing it. Picture a circle, 200 miles across, centered on Amarillo. Inside that circle, more cattle are fattened for beef than anywhere else on Earth. By volume, the Texas Panhandle finishes around 42% of all the fed beef in the United States. Not Texas's beef, America's beef. Stop and think about what that means. The hamburger you ate last week, the steak, the brisket, the fast food burger. There's a better than even chance the animal it came from spent its last months in a feedlot within driving distance of Amarillo. The reasons are all here. Flat, cheap land for the feed yards, grain from the surrounding farms, the Ogallala water to grow that grain, and a dry climate that keeps the cattle healthy. One town nearby, Hereford, feeds over 1 million head a year by itself and calls itself the beef capital of the world. People picture American beef coming from everywhere. Green ranches, rolling hills, all over the map. Nearly half of it comes from one flat circle of the Texas Panhandle that almost nobody ever drives out to see. You have been eating the Panhandle your whole life. 2. America builds its nuclear weapons in a cattle field. 17 miles northeast of Amarillo, surrounded by wheat and grazing cattle, is the single most important and most dangerous facility most Americans have never heard of. It's called Pantex, and it is the only place in the entire United States that assembles, disassembles, and maintains the country's nuclear weapons. Every one. There is nowhere else. During the Cold War, essentially the entire American nuclear arsenal, something like 70,000 warheads over the decades, passed through this one site in the Texas Panhandle. And it's not just assembly. Pantex stores the plutonium cores of retired nuclear weapons, thousands upon thousands of them, in earth-covered bunkers right there on the high plains. It is widely described as the largest concentration of plutonium on the planet. The airspace overhead is permanently sealed off to civilian aircraft, and from the highway, you'd barely know it was there. No dramatic perimeter, just flat Texas land and a fence, with cattle grazing nearby. The most ordinary-looking corner of America holds the most dangerous arsenal in the country, handled in a place people fly straight over without ever looking down. 1. The empty giant that quietly runs America. We end where we began, with the land everybody writes off as nothing. Here is what that nothing actually is. The Texas Panhandle covers almost 26,000 square miles, bigger than the entire state of West Virginia. And across all that space live only about 430,000 people. That's under 2% of Texas's population. On a piece of land, you could lose a whole state inside. More than 60% of those people are packed into a single city, Amarillo. Step outside it, and you're in some of the emptiest country in America. 16 people per square mile, against a national average many times that. So you'd assume a place that empty doesn't matter much. You'd be exactly, completely wrong. And that's the whole point of everything you've just heard. This near-empty rectangle finishes nearly half the nation's beef. It assembles every nuclear weapon the country owns. It grew most of the world's helium for a century. It feeds the nation its wheat and its corn. It holds an ocean of water under the ground, and a canyon you could lose a city in. 13,000 years of human history, a vanished empire, and a buried bloodline of the last Southern Plains bison. America looks straight past the Panhandle, flat, empty, flyover country, a blur between two other places. But the emptiest looking corner of Texas is quietly one of the places holding the whole country up. You've driven through it 100 times. Now you know what you were driving through. After these 35 facts about the Texas Panhandle, which one got you? Drop it in the comments and tell me where you stand on that Tulia question. If you want to keep exploring the hidden side of America, watch California's Central Valley or the Florida Panhandle next. Subscribe and like, and I'll see you in the next one.